I'm Aaron Fowler and welcome to another episode of the Disability Sports Podcast. I'd like to begin this episode by saying a huge thank you to everyone who has listened to the podcast so far. Don't forget you can follow us on social media at the Disability Sports Podcast on TikTok and Instagram. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to my friend and neighbour Miguel, who has kindly been helping to produce the last few episodes of the podcast, which has helped us to improve the quality of the audio and video we use for the podcast. My guest this week is former Great Britain wheelchair tennis player Louise Hunt Skelley. During the interview, Louise talks about her impressive tennis career, having competed in 2 Paralympics and having played at Wimbledon. She also discusses what she's been up to since retiring from playing, including commentary and being a tournament director. Here is the interview, and I hope you enjoy the episode.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really good, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm looking forward to chatting to you. So I had your other half on, obviously Chris, about 18 months ago, and I think after when I spoke to him, it was only a few months after you guys have got married. So I guess first question is how's married life?
You'll be happy to know it's still wonderful. That could have been a risky question, couldn't it? No, really good. I'll be completely honest. We are one of those couples that genuinely loves being married, and we're still very much living that kind of Chris hates the term honeymoon phase, but we're 8 years in, and I still feel like we're kind of in it. So yeah, very happily married still. Thank you.
Oh, that's lovely to hear. Well, I'm looking forward to chatting to you today and learning, more about your journey and kind of what you've been up to since retiring from the sport a few years ago and things like that. So just wondered if you could start off by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I just said my name's Louise. I'm now Louise Hunt Skelley, although I sometimes forget that my name now has 2 at the end. And I played wheelchair tennis, so that was my sport, the best sport. Obviously, I'm biased. I first picked up a tennis racket when I was 5 years old, and then I competed. So obviously started recreationally, and then competed right up until 3 years ago. I can't believe it's been 3 years. In the later years of my career, I was full-time professional. And finished 3 years ago. So for me, wheelchair tennis has always been a part of my life and continues to be, which is something I'm really happy about, because although I'm retired, which I'm sure we'll talk about, I never fell out of love with my sport. It was just a role I was playing. So still very passionate about the sport, or disability sport, but obviously I'm biased towards tennis.
And you mentioned you started playing when you were 5. How did you first get involved with the sport?
Well, so when I first started playing tennis, I was just playing with my family, and it wasn't until basically I was playing with my family just for fun, like you would any kids with their parents and their siblings, and then my parents kind of saw that I had, let's say, a competitive bug in me maybe, and that I loved it, and they did a bit of research and then found out about Stoke Mandeville, and for those who don't know, Stoke Mandeville is where the Paralympics first began. And now it's this awesome sports stadium where you can try out all these disability sports. And they took me there, and it was there that I always described that we found out wheelchair tennis was an actual thing. Because up until then, I was just playing tennis in a wheelchair, if that makes sense. But my parents, we didn't have anyone else disabled in the family, so they didn't have much knowledge. But when we got there, they were pleasantly surprised. I was like, oh, this is an actual sport. Louise isn't just doing it differently. There's a whole world of people playing wheelchair tennis recreationally and professionally. And that's kind of where I sort of properly discovered it, really.
And what was it, from a young age that you loved about tennis that kind of kept you, playing the sport for obviously such a long time?
But I think it remained the same thing. And for me, tennis was. So I'm someone that gets bored really easily. So I love challenge. I love trying new things. And I have an inner desire to always get better at something. And for me, tennis is so diverse. So whether it be, if you think about tennis, to list a few, courts are different, rackets are different, opponents, balls, weather, surfaces, indoors, outdoors, and then you've got all the different types of shots that you play. And not only do you have slice, topspin, flat, you then got that on every single shot. And for me, that was just so exciting. There was always so much to learn, and I felt like that even now when I still play for my own enjoyment. I still love that about the sport. And then in later years, the thing that made me love it even more was that it meant I travelled the world. And I saw all these places I could never even have dreamt of going or even imagined I'd go. And then on top of that, I met some incredible people. And there's nothing like traveling the world and meeting people from different countries and backgrounds to like educate you. And I met some of my closest friends that way. So for me, it evolved a bit, but that whole it was always something new and challenging. It never stopped like keeping me engaged.
So, did you play any other sports growing up, Louise? And did you have any sporting idols when you were younger?
Yeah, so I tried lots of different sports when I was growing up. I tried basketball, swimming, but there was one other sport that kind of captured my heart, and that was wheelchair racing. And I actually came across wheelchair racing at Stoke Mandeville as well. And I actually competed in 10 London mini wheelchair marathons, and I won 7 of those. So I was doing quite well as a junior actually in racing. Actually, at the time, I was better at racing than I was at tennis. But for the reasons I said earlier about why I love tennis so much, that's how I ended up going in that direction. But in terms of like a sporting idol for me, I met Tanya Gray Thompson when I was quite young. Um, and I remember her being in like her Paralympic kit and she had her medals and things. And I still remember to this day, like, she was the first person who I felt that at that stage in my life, had met who I could really relate to. She used a wheelchair, she had the same disability as me, and from that point on, I just remember being like, I want to be like you. Because up until then, like, I didn't really, I had people in my family that I admired, and who really inspired me. But actually, she was the first person I met who, that relatability. It was like, oh, I could be successful. I could be like you. So yeah, she was kind of my early sporting idol, and actually still today is someone I really look up to because I'm really impressed by what else she's done with her career around her sporting achievements too. So she's definitely somebody I still admire.
It's interesting you say that because I think it's a common theme I think that comes up in my interviews is the importance of sort of having someone who's in a who maybe has a similar condition as yourself or is for me it's someone who other people who are visually impaired who I can look up to or learn from, and I think it's a very important thing. And I think I mean, we're of a similar age, I think, both born in the same year, and I think things are massively different now to when they were like 20 years ago. Like when I was younger, I couldn't name you other than Stevie Wonder or was it David Blunkett. I don't think I could have named you any famous blind or visually impaired people. Whereas now you've got Livy Clegg and lots of other Chris and obviously all the VI judo guys. The Partially Sighted futsal team. There's so many people now who are gradually becoming more sort of household names that you can look up to, and there's so many more sporting opportunities out there as well. Is that something you've noticed? Do you think since you were a child that think opportunities within sort of wheelchair sports have improved?
Oh no, 100%. And I talk about this quite often. Like it's exciting because I mean I feel lucky that I had a family that helped me find sport at a young age, and that I grew through it. And I was willing to work hard, but I got good at it and made it into a career. But like now, I just see like it's everywhere, and it's becoming so much more mainstream. Like you said, a lot of Paralympic athletes or disabled athletes becoming more household names. We're seeing them on TV. They're on the more kind of like mainstream social media platforms. So like I definitely notice a difference, which I find really exciting. I still feel there's a way to go, but I do find it exciting because when I was a child, I think without realizing it, I was perhaps scratching around for those role models that I could relate to. Whereas now, like you just reeled off a list, and I could probably do the same for people I could relate to or look up to, and that's a great thing. So I just I really hope that young people now, well, people of any age, don't have to have that struggle, to find someone who they can go, oh, like you've had a similar life to me. I can be like you or become successful in whatever because you have, and that becomes a bit of a like confidence boost in a way.
Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I from doing my research and things, I understand you have a condition called spina bifida, which I think is a condition that probably quite a lot of people have heard about, but perhaps probably don't know how that affects a person day to day. So I just wondered if you could just give a brief sort of description of what spina bifida is and how that kind of affects you day to day.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, I think my disability is one that a lot of people have heard about it, but actually don't fully understand the implications. So the one thing I always say about my disability, like others, is that obviously I can explain the way it affects me, but of course it's different for everybody. But in terms of myself, I've never been able to walk, so I've always used a wheelchair. And from my waist down, I've got limited movement and feeling, so I've never been able to walk. And that's kind of the main way it affects me, really. Sort of from like the waist up, my body works. My least favorite word ever. Normally, I hate the word normal, but that's probably an easy way to describe it. But yeah, it just affects my lower body is the way my spina bifida affects me.
You've obviously touched on, the fact that you were, good in a few sports, obviously wheelchair racing and tennis, when you're younger. So at what age did you sort of get to a point where you thought, right, I need to sort of dedicate myself to one sport and this is the one that I really want to, succeed at?
Yeah, so I was about 16, 17. And what actually kind of made me kind of like align that focus was I was given the opportunity to go to the Beijing Paralympic Games with the development team. And so what happens each Paralympic Games is they take a group of athletes who they can see having potential to qualify for the next one. It's almost like a bit of an inspiration trip, really. And it was that experience that made me kind of channel where I wanted to go, because I remember being there and just thinking, like, I always describe it as like I watched the opening ceremony and I actually just sat there and was like, I just don't really want to be watching. I want to be in this thing. And I remember just leaving there saying, the next one of these, I'm going to be in it looking up at the crowd, not at the crowd looking down. Like, that's not where I want to be. And it was coming home from that trip that made me go, right, like, what do I want to do? And if I'm being honest, a lot of people thought I was a bit crazy because I was more naturally gifted at racing. I had to work hard, but I picked that up more naturally. Whereas tennis, I have no natural ability, and I really had to try hard. But like I said earlier, that's kind of the thing that I loved, because I loved that challenge. I never found it boring. So it was that trip really that made me like kind of really channel my focus. And I was like, right, tennis is going to be the one, and the next one I'm going to do everything I can to be in it rather than watching.
And I think I read again that, as a junior, you got to number 2 in the world. So how old were you when you sort of, first competed in the senior tournament?
So I was actually really young. So I first competed in a senior tournament. I think I was 14. So I was actually still a junior by age. So for a couple of years, I did a bit of both, a bit of juniors and a bit of seniors. But I was at a level where I was kind of good enough to start playing at a senior level internationally. So they kind of overlapped for a little while, which was obviously really exciting. And I can remember the first time I did that, I can remember it really well and just being terrified, but also thinking like, this is where I really want to be, because obviously playing in juniors is exciting, but I was heading for like the big stuff. I wanted, the Grand Slams were appealing, the Paralympics were appealing, so that was kind of like where your focus was. So I can remember playing. I mean, obviously the first few senior tournaments, I didn't do so great and lost often in the first round, but it takes time.
Absolutely. And what did you learn from those first few tournaments? So, like you say, when you first entered and weren't winning much, what were the things you took away that then helped you to improve as a player?
I think it's probably two things. It was like, one, I really want this. It was like a really big like eye opener of like, actually, I'm loving this, even though I'm losing. This is where I want to be. And the other one is just learning what it was that I had to do, because you don't, until you play against the best in the world, you don't really know what it is like that you've got. You don't feel the progress that you need to make, because anyone can look good in a training session, but then you play against the best in the world and you kind of understand that gap and you realize things like, oh right, okay, I'm really not as consistent as them, okay, I'm really not as powerful as them, for example. So it was just an eye-opener in terms of what needed to change in my game.
And what was the first tournament you competed in where you were representing Great Britain?
Oh, good question. You're now testing my memory. First, so I think it would have been my first ever World Team Cup. It was either my first ever World Team Cup, which was in Holland. I think I was 11 or 12 years old. But I competed in the Junior Masters in around a similar time. So it was one of those two. I think the World Team Cup came first. And then I actually competed in 13 of those in total. A few in juniors and the rest in seniors. So if people don't know, the World Team Cup is basically the equivalent of the Davis Cup in standing up tennis. It's the equivalent.
And when you were competing, if I remember correctly, I think GB had quite a few good women players. I think Jordan Wiley obviously won some Grand Slams. I think Lucy Schuker, I think, is a name that sort of rings a bell. So, was it quite competitive in the women's, sort of team to get into the GB side?
Yeah, very. So for a long time, it was just us three for a long time in terms of those top ranked women. For a long time, the three of us were all ranked inside the top 10. So yeah, absolutely competitive, especially in terms of like being at those World Team Cup events and, things like playing doubles and stuff like that. 3 is a really tricky number. And unfortunately, for the majority of that time, I was number 3, which meant that I sometimes was put in a bit of a tough position. But we love the challenge, and actually, I'm still good friends with both of them. Geordie is actually one of my best friends. In fact, she literally just WhatsApped me, so her ears are burning. But Geordie, that was really weird. But literally, she's like one of my best friends. She's like a sister to me because we actually started in the same year and finished our careers in the same year too, which is pretty special. We had our whole tennis journey together.
And how is it when you're obviously good friends with people? So sometimes obviously in like the team events, or possibly a doubles event, you might be competing together, but then obviously other times you're competing against each other. I mean, obviously we've seen it in recent years, haven't we, with like Alfie and Gordon, sort of competing with each other in the doubles, but then sometimes facing each other in finals and things like that. So how do you deal with that situation?
Yeah, do you know, it's a really interesting question, and it took me some time to get used to, but actually I think with the wheelchair tennis tour, like, it's such a big worldwide tour, right? There's just shy of 200 tournaments all around the world. And actually, when you're at a certain level, you live on that tour. So you're with those people all the time, and it just becomes normal. Like, it becomes normal because, you're sharing hotels, sometimes hotel rooms, you're having dinner, you sometimes travel together. And actually, it's not unusual to have them beside you 1 minute in a doubles court and then as your opponent the next. And I think for me, I got to a point, I struggled for a while, but I got to a point where I could really separate those things. Like, for me, off the court, so like Geordie is the best example. She's my friend. But if she's the opposite side, she is just my opponent. And it sounds a little bit basic, but my team used to have like a bit of a saying. They'd be like, just play the yellow fluffy thing. You're playing the yellow ball. You're playing the yellow fluffy thing. And actually, it sounds really simple, but it really helped me. It's like, yeah, I'm playing the ball. I'm not playing who it is. And that was just something that just helped me. So it's just something that I think everyone handles it differently. I know some people really struggle, and like that was me for a while. But in the end, it was like, I just love my tennis. And at the end of the day, I wanted to be the best I could be. So no matter who it was, I wanted to be them. But I think it's like a really healthy thing. I mean, it wouldn't be odd, to be on a court against someone who's either a friend or you really like, in the afternoon, and then in dinner at the evening is sitting having dinner. Like, that just became normal. And I think we all just got used to it.
And what was the first Grand Slam that you played in?
Wimbledon, which still to this day, I'm so happy I managed to get to Wimbledon twice, and it was quite cool actually. So the first year, it was just singles. At that point, they hadn't introduced doubles, and then the second year, other way around. It was just doubles, and they hadn't introduced singles. Sorry, and then this next time I went, there was both. And it was kind of exciting to be part of that first year. It was a bit of history making. But for me now, to this day, if anyone said, could you do one event ever again, I'd pick Wimbledon in a heartbeat, even over like the Paralympics, because as a British tennis player, it's just like, that's the place that you dream of being. Even though I cannot pull off white. I mean, not many people can. That all white look is a little bit got an edge, But it genuinely, like, for me, was just, that's my proudest like achievement that I ever did, was get to our home Grand Slam. It was incredible.
And did you play in any other Grand Slams, around the world?
No, I didn't. So I never qualified for the other ones. Just kept it for the best one,
Absolutely.
But I've been to some other ones. I actually had a really cool opportunity to go to the US Open with Aniek van Cote. So she's one of the best Dutch players in the world. Has always been in the top 5 for as long as I can remember. And I think at the time I was ranked about 11 or 12. I was only just out really, but she said, "Oh, do you want to come and like be my hitter and warm me up?" And I got to experience that. It was pretty cool. But yeah, no, in terms of competing, I just got to Wimbledon, but still something I'm incredibly proud of, because like I say, as a British player, that's just like the ultimate kind of dream.
And as a player, you competed in 2 Paralympics, in London in 2012 and Rio in 2016. Can you tell us a bit about your experiences competing at the Paralympics?
Yeah, so I mean, for to have your first ever Paralympics in your home country, being London, I think was just like the most unbelievable gift ever. I mean, I'm so happy and grateful that aligned with my career. I do remember when I heard it was going to be in London, I was thinking, I have to make that one. If it's the last thing I do, I need to be in that Paralympic Games. And for me, like, the experience of London was, it was the first time I had ever really competed in a big event where I just felt like equal. And what I mean is that I felt like everyone came to watch elite sport rather than, oh wow, look what these people could do because they're disabled and doing sport. It's like, no, actually, we're good athletes that train just as hard as Olympic athletes. If arguably have more barriers and challenges to handle, and we can compete at this top level. And I really felt that. It felt like there was a level of respect. Like the education around it was great, and it changed my life because actually, because of the profile, it helped my personal profile, which meant that I then gained more sponsors. I gained more work in terms of doing speeches, for example. The thing I loved was that overnight I went from. It's quite funny. I feel like in the lead up to London, I do a lot of work in school. I still do it now. I did then. I go into school and the questions that kids would ask me, and they're awesome, but there was like no knowledge at all about what I was doing. And then I was going into schools after, and they correct me on stuff. They'd be like, "Oh, actually, at the Paralympics, this happened." I think, "Oh goodness me!" Like they're more switched on with their knowledge than I am, and that was really exciting. And then Rio was just like a very different experience for me because for London, I just scraped qualification. I mean, I got in by the skin of my teeth at the very end. And whereas Rio, I was ranked 10 in the world. In comparison for London, I did 25 tournaments around the world, and I just got in ranked 18 in the world, and it's the top 22 that qualify automatically. And then Rio, I was ranked 10 in the world, and I only did 10 tournaments to get that qualification. So where I was in my career was very different. And London was just exciting. I'm going to be a Paralympian in the Paralympics. Rio was like, right, I want to try and do well. I was in a different place career-wise, but Rio was an amazing experience. Again, it was interesting to go to a games that wasn't in my home country, and that the whole crowd wasn't on my side that time. But I met my husband there, so I'll always be grateful for Rio because if it wasn't for Rio, I wouldn't be happily married now. So. There's good stories from both.
Absolutely, no, that's brilliant to hear. I saw that. I think you. Am I right thinking you and Chris had maybe done an article in a magazine quite recently about. And I think one of the headlines was about we didn't win medals, but found each other or something in
Yes.
in Rio, which I thought was very nice, very heartwarming thing to read. So that's awesome to hear. What would you say were your strengths and weaknesses as a player?
So my strengths were my court speed, and my I could hang into any match as long as you needed me to be in it. So I was consistent and I could be out there all day. My stamina was like one of my biggest strengths for sure, and that would carry me through. And also so my best shot was my reverse topspin backhand. That was like my strongest weapon. My topspin forehand was good, but my reverse backhand was my ultimate weapon. I mean, if I could play a whole match just hitting those, I would have done. So they were kind of my strengths. I think my weaknesses, my slice wasn't quite as strong as my topspin backhand, and my serve could be a little bit up and down. So those are probably my weaknesses. And then actually, not so much in the end of my career, but earlier on, it was like that self-belief that I could do it was a weakness in my game because it was like it took me a long time to learn to cope under pressure and really close out those big points, and that was because I lacked in belief. So that affected my game. But when I got to a point where I had an amazing sports psychologist that really helped me, really learn to focus on the yellow fluffy thing. I know it sounds silly, but it really helped me just to really hone in on my tennis and not get absorbed by anything else. That definitely became one of my strengths. Actually, it kind of changed from being a weakness to a strength.
And you mentioned there about obviously the important role that sports psychologists played in your career. How did you deal with the pressures, I guess, of competing at the elite level, especially as you competed at that level for such a long time?
Yeah, I think I've mentioned sports psychology, but my sports psychologist in recent years was Carl Steptoe, and he deserves mentioning because he changed not only my athletic life, he has changed my life in the way he helped me see things differently. And it was just coming up with it's coming up with strategies and things that really help you. It's all about keeping in the present. So when you, as an athlete, like you say, there's so many pressures, there's so many things going on, it's really easy for your mind to wander. But the best thing he ever taught me was that that's okay, but the skill you need to learn is to bring your attention back. Like, you're a human being, you've got to go, oh my god, I'm at Wimbledon, oh my goodness, I've got match point against this player. Like, that's normal and that's okay. But it's like, have that thought and then bring yourself back to the present. And I had a few different techniques. Like, for example, one of them was my wheelchair push rim got damaged on a flight and it had a little tiny dent in it, right? And one of my like grounding methods to bring me back to the present was, as I was wheeling, I would feel and try and find it. And I'd be so focused trying to find this dent that my attention would be completely back to the present. By the time I found it, I'd stop thinking about whatever I was distracted by and I was back in the present. How simple is that? But it worked. And there was lots of little things like that he taught me.
And is there anyone else who you would say has been particularly a big influence on your tennis career?
Yeah, so I mean, to be honest, there are a lot, and that's both like sporting team and family. But like the person that like deserves the most credit is my coach Ali Ward, because I started working with Ali when I was 5 years old. Literally tennis club in my village. As I said earlier, I was enjoying playing tennis. My parents were like, oh, let's see if we can get Louise a coach and get her some like regular sessions. Ali knew nothing about wheelchair tennis, neither did we. And we literally learned it together, and then, God, 20 years later, I'm in Paralympics and Wimbledon and we're both sat there going, how did we get from that to this? So he has literally been by my side from the moment I picked up a racket right until I retired. And even now, I still go and have a hit, just for fun with him. But that's quite unusual for a coach to last with a player for that long. But he's just really an incredible person, and he really deserves like the majority of credit, to be fair, because he put up with me for so long.
That's amazing to hear. As you mentioned, there's not many athletes who stay with the coach, the same coach from such a young age all through their career. I guess you think about someone like Andy Murray, who has gone through quite a few coaches in his career, or other players and athletes from other sports as well. So that's really nice to hear. Who were the best players that you played both with and against?
Brilliant question. So I'd mentioned Jordan Wally. Oh my goodness, I really struggled playing her because her playing style was so slicey and low and effective, and she had such a good game face. Like it's so funny. Like, she's my bestie, but on the other end of the court, God, she was frustrating, because she was tough to play against, like technically and tactically. So definitely her. I always struggled as well against Yui Kimiji, who is currently world number 2. She's still playing. Japanese player. I found it really tough playing her too. Again, quite a slicey game, so that's it. And it makes sense with my playing style, like, because that's like the opposite to what I like. So those were a couple that I found really tough to beat, to play against. But the favourite person I've ever played with was another one of my best friends, Dana Matheson. She's the American number 1, still playing at the moment. I was recently her bridesmaid, actually. She just got married and she was mine too. It's what I mean. You can create some like of the best friendships ever in that world. But for me, like, playing with her was my favourite thing in the world, because there was something about that underlying friendship which just brought out our best tennis. And even when things were going wrong or someone was having a really tough day, struggling to find whatever it may be, their consistency, whatever, because we knew each other so well, we had that ability to be like, right, I'm with you and I've got you and I'm going to get you through this little tough phase, because in a minute you're going to have it back and I believe in you. And we had some incredible results together. And I honestly played the best tennis that I've ever played alongside her. And they're some of my favourite memories ever of being on tour, was playing alongside my best friend. It was amazing.
And you've obviously had a phenomenal career. I mean, playing in Grand Slams, playing in Paralympics, winning events, things like that is amazing. And getting to world number 10 is phenomenal. But what do you think is the difference between sort of getting to world number 10 to then being able to get 9 places higher to sort of world number 1? Because it must be very fine margins.
Yeah, I think it is fine margins, actually. And I think there's like a few things. If I'm honest, disability comes into it slightly. Like we see in a lot of Paralympic sports, we're all limited by our physical ability to an extent. And it was really tough playing against players that had, more core stability than me, had function in their lower limbs. To be clear, all eligible to play, but they just, there is a difference there. So that's one thing. I think the money that people can put into it, of course, sport is expensive. We all know that. But being able to fund everything that you could possibly ever need, I think that helps. But I do agree that it is fine margins actually, and a lot of it's mindset. Some people have a champion mindset, some people are slightly off that mark, some people don't have it at all, and that's just part of our characters, right? So I think there's a few things, but what excites me about wheelchair tennis, especially now, actually, is like those. Like if you look at the game now, like even I go as far as outside the top 10. Those players are so close, and they're all beating each other. So regardless of ranking, it's exciting because actually you go to tournaments and go, I don't know who's going to win this, and that excites me. I quite like the days of just one or two people winning everything to kind of go, and for the sport to expand in that way. And I think we're going that way, which is exciting.
And I think it was in 2021, you took the decision, obviously, to retire from the sport. What led you to making that decision?
Yeah, so I was always aiming and hoping to compete in Tokyo. So for me, that was going to be like my last games. That was what I was aiming towards. And then the pandemic came, and as we all know, the Paralympics and Olympics got postponed by a year. And when that happened, I felt a little something inside of me, like a little light go out in a like I just don't have this in me for another year. I had my sights very much set on a timeline, because I was becoming exhausted by like the rigmarole of it. At that point in my life, I was also like fully self-funded, so I was like working and trying to fund my tennis career, which was absolutely exhausting. So when it got postponed, I remember feeling like I can't do this for another year. Chris actually gave me some very good advice and was like, you can't make this decision in a lockdown, in a pandemic, because none of us were quite thinking arguably rationally or how we normally would. He was like, get out of this, go and do some tournaments, see how you feel, and base it on that, which is what I did. And I played a couple of tournaments post lockdown, and I lost a few rounds in, and I just noticed that it just didn't hurt me like it used to. Like as an athlete, losing is like the worst thing that can happen. You play because you want to win. You have this unbelievable desire to win, but I lost, and it just didn't quite hurt like it once did. And when you've been 100% in at something, and you're even 99% in, you feel that difference. And then I had a really good chat with my team. Like they could sense this coming, and I basically went to a session, and one of my team said, "Why are you here?" And I was like, "To train." And they were like, "No, why?" I was like, "To train." I said, "But why?" I went, "Because that's what I do." And they said, "That's not a good enough answer." And we had this amazing chat, and they just said, "Look, why are you still playing?" And I couldn't give them an answer because I'd actually achieved, like, I wanted to become a Paralympian. I did that twice. I wanted to get to a Grand Slam. I got to Wimbledon twice, of all Grand Slams. I know it sounds mushy, but I met Chris. It was like my sport had given me everything that I could ever dream of, and I'd met every target I set myself, and it was like I am actually done. And that was kind of how I got to my decision, really. And I can't quite believe that it's been 3 years. Like the time's flown by. But I didn't regret it. I've not regretted it once since I made that decision. I'm really happy to say I managed to get my timing right. And I've not regretted it once.
And again, from kind of what I've been reading, it sounds like you've been pretty busy since retirement. So I know obviously you've done some commentating at like the Paralympics and Wimbledon. How did those opportunities come about, and is that something that you've enjoyed doing?
Yeah, no, I love it. So Wimbledon's a really interesting one because this will be my 9th year commentating for Wimbledon because I actually commentated whilst I played. So I played like before I qualified, then I played for a couple of years, and I came back again. And that opportunity just came about because they really wanted I don't like to say this about myself, but an expert in the sport. And as I was a competing athlete, they came to me. I don't know why they picked me, but I'm still here 9 years later, so I think it's gone well. Actually, it's more than 9 years because I've played twice and we had a pandemic, so 12 years later. And yeah, I love it. And I'm pleased that's continuing. I mean, commentating on the games in Tokyo was awesome, and it could have been a weird experience considering I was aiming to get to those games and I wasn't in it, but I loved it. I've done the Europeans last year. I'm doing the Paralympics again this year. So it's just a really nice way to stay involved in the sport I love. Yeah, and I'm really grateful for those opportunities.
I think you're absolutely correct to call yourself an expert in wheelchair tennis because I think what's great now that we're seeing in disability sports is with Channel 4's coverages they are inviting sort of ex-athletes or maybe current athletes who haven't qualified for a tournament, who compete in certain sports, to be the ones to add insight into it. Because, again, like, when we were kids, there probably wasn't the people around to be able to do that. So I think it's, it's a great thing that we're starting to see, and it all helps, increase the quality of the coverage, I think, of disability sport and the analysis that comes with the media coverage. Absolutely. So it's brilliant. When you were commentating out in Tokyo, were you fortunate enough to be able to still watch Chris compete at all?
So there's a funny story about that. So I was based in London because of the pandemic. Like hardly any of the team were actually there. So the majority of team were over here. So I was commentating remotely, but I obviously, like, everyone knew that Chris was competing over, and it was whilst I was on air. And I'd said that I am gonna have my iPad up, and I was with Gigi Salmon, and she was commentating with me, and she was wonderful. She was just like, mute yourself, like, do what you need to do. But I don't think I muted myself quite in time, and I think my screen did go out live during a tennis match. And Gigi had to be like, just so everyone knows, Louise is fine. Her then fiance has just won gold. And I was just an emotional wreck. And actually, everyone, I have to say, in the team was so wonderfully supportive and amazing. Because I said, look, heads up, Chris is competing today. I am having my iPad. Obviously, everyone was like, of course. And Gigi was like, even if you just want to like go off for a few minutes, like, I get it. But I was like, no, I want to do my job, But it was so hard to concentrate on that and then watch Chris live. But luckily I did, and then I obviously got the phone call as well, which was amazing. And just wonderful, obviously, to see him achieve his dream. So it's a unique experience, and it was the first time I'd actually commentated like remotely away from an event. So that was a bit of a learning curve too. But I would say it saved me the jet lag, but it was actually really hard being on Tokyo time in London. That brought a whole new world of challenges, actually.
And another thing I sort of understand that you've done as well is being a tournament director at some wheelchair tennis events. Again, how did that opportunity come about, and is that something that you're keen to sort of carry on with going forward?
Yeah, do you know what? This is something I never imagined myself doing, but it was back in 2022, so the year after I retired. A wonderful lady at the LTA called Kirsty contacted me and just said, look, we're looking at sort of outsourcing some tournament directors, and actually on the wheelchair front, like, we'd really like an ex-player, someone who can bring that experience, that personal experience, who knows the players. Would you be interested? And I was like, I haven't done this before, right? Like, this isn't something I can do. And she was like, I know you haven't, but I believe you can. Which I always think is one of the nicest things anyone can ever say to you, is just to have that belief in you. So I gave it a go, and I've done, what have I done now? Goodness me. I've done 4 in a tournament director role, and then I'm currently helping with an event now, but I did one last year and the year before too, where I was like just part of the events team. So I'm kind of like fairly deep into that journey now. But I love it, actually. I really love it. It's hard work and way harder than being a player. But I really like the challenge of it, and it's a really lovely way to give back to the sport. Again, being in the sport I still love, but just playing a different role.
Can you tell us a little bit about what your role as tournament director involves?
Everything. So this is the thing that I think, like, I now understand but didn't understand as a player. So like everything falls on you. So it's all the logistical stuff beforehand. So that's from booking the venue to compete at, the hotels, arranging officials, volunteers, head referee, catering, all of that sort of stuff. So all that pre-stuff, getting that in place. Then it's the logistics around flights and making sure all the players, obviously, they're flying in from all over the world. So it's arranging that transport to get them to and from wherever they need to be. And then, of course, then there's the day-to-day managing of the actual tournament as well, prize money, and overseeing like the overall event, really. So, I mean, that's it in a nutshell. There's like a million other things, but it's kind of like, it's quite a surreal experience sort of being in charge of an event like that. But I'm so grateful for it, and I love it. And I've been really lucky that every event I've done, I've had this amazing team around me. And a lot of whom have done a lot more than me and are more experienced than me. So, for example, like the referees. I mean, the irony is I work with referees now that would umpire my matches when I was a player. So that's quite a cool experience to be working alongside them. But I love it, and I hope I can continue to do them because I really do enjoy them. But they are really hard work. And like I said, players are always asking me. Obviously, a lot of my friends are still competing. They're like, "They said, what's this like?" And I'm like, "Guys, keep playing tennis. It's way easier."
And with Wimbledon, coming up later in the year, and obviously the Paralympics, for anyone who perhaps hasn't watched much wheelchair tennis, who are the athletes to look out for at those competitions?
Yeah, so obviously I'm going to be a bit biased towards GB players. So Gordon and Alfie are kind of the probably names people might recognise, but they really do have shots at winning both. Singles and doubles, they are both equally good contenders in both for Wimbledon and Paris. And I think actually the exciting thing about Paris is that's going to be like the next best thing to a home games that we're going to experience, like largely because of that time difference. We're still in Europe. Like there's a lot of familiarity there. They're playing at Roland Garros. They've played there a million times before, So they're definitely ones to look out for. Internationally, like Takito from Japan, he's like got, this guy's still under 20 and his potential is unreal. Incredible athlete. And then Dida de Groot in the women's. And of course, not forgetting our top woman, Lucy Sugar, who should appear at both as well. And obviously, we really are rooting for her too. So we've got lots of like the British interest, but yeah, some international players too that are definitely ones to watch. But the level gets higher and higher every year. So yeah, I just say do watch it and enjoy some world class wheelchair tennis because the stage is getting bigger for us and the players just keep getting better and better.
And wheelchair tennis is obviously a sport that's grown massively over the last sort of say 20 years or so. And in terms of disability sports, I think it's certainly leading the way in terms of prize money, in terms of the competitions that you can take part in and things like that. But what are your hopes for the future of the sport?
So for me, one of my biggest hopes is that we obviously continue on that trajectory. But prize money is great. Like we're at the big events like Grand Slams, but we can make that more inclusive than it already is. So actually, the prize money could increase. Now, the way I describe what I think should happen is that I don't necessarily believe it should be equal to the standing at the main tennis event in terms of able-bodied guys, because at the moment our draw sizes are smaller. But I think actually progress would be that every round matches the equal round for the able-bodied event. So, for example, first round is this much for all events, wheelchair and AB, if that makes sense. So I think that would be progress. I also last year was really cool. Wimbledon had us on court one every day, between the matches that would normally be there, all in different parts of the schedule. That's really exciting. But that's also another thing. If we want to keep that progress going, these events need to be inclusive. It's not good enough just having us there. We need to be there in the same places. So that's being on the big courts, for example. Wimbledon, like I say, did a great job of that last year, but that needs to keep going in the right direction because it's not good enough anymore to tick box. Yeah, the wheelchair guys are here. Yeah, but where are we? Are we being shown on TV as much as the other matches? Are we on the main courts? Are we being promoted in the same way? That's how we have progress. But I do feel in our sport, I am seeing that.
Good, and that's great to hear because I think that's as a journalist, it's one thing that's really frustrated me is that we always hear a lot in the news about and rightly so about the need to obviously make sort of the women's game equal pay and things like that, which obviously I absolutely agree with. But one thing I don't think we hear enough is the fact that as you've mentioned, disability sports, whether it's tennis or other sports, still aren't treated as equal in terms of prize money, in terms of access to facilities, grounds, in terms of the media coverage, things like that. So hopefully, I think things are going the right way. It's just going to obviously take time to get there, isn't it? But I think we have to look at the small gains we're making all the time.
Everything has its timeline. Yeah, everything has its timeline, and we are getting there. And like I say, with the prize money thing, because I had someone say to me, well, shouldn't the wheelchair guys get a couple of million, the able-bodied event? And I'm like, I that's where I want us to be, and I do think that if we had the same draw size, that is absolutely what should happen. At the moment, the Grand Slams for the wheelchair event have smaller draws. So, for example, at the majority, there's 16 in the singles draw. So for me, it should be the equivalent of how many matches you play, it equates across all the different draws, because I think that's fair, because then you're getting financially rewarded for the same what's like same effort, if that kind of makes sense. The same amount of wins. Hopefully that makes sense. And yeah, one day when we have the same draw size as them, which we should, then yes, it should be exactly the same for the winner. But I think at the very least, the round should be the same. So I think that, and I hope that changes soon, because I think that's how it should be now. Yes, we're seeing the prize money increase, but it can still be better. But we are seeing progress. So let's just keep it going in that direction.
We've obviously talked, a lot about your sporting career. What are your sort of, hobbies and interests outside of tennis?
I'm a obsessed dog mum. So Chris and I are those classic couple in their 30s with no children and a dog. So our world revolves around him. I mean, we love being outdoors. So for me, any adventures with Milo, our dog, is like my favorite thing to do when I have free time. I love music, so I play the piano. But anything music related, so whether that be gigs, musicals, like that's where you will find me if I have spare time. So they're kind of like my main kind of passions, really. And actually, just still, like, I still love to travel, but I'm really enjoying like getting to know our country better now. Like, where I spent years and years flying all around the world, I almost feel like I missed out on like the local stuff. I know that probably sounds really silly, but like I didn't have time. And then when I come home, I just want to be at home. Whereas now, like, I'm really enjoying like having like little mini getaways in the UK and stuff. So I've still got that like bug to travel, but I'm actually really enjoying it. It's still a novelty for me to have like my own time and not be pinned down by things. So I'm really enjoying like that bit of adventure as well.
And finally, what are your goals and aspirations for the future?
It's really interesting. So I'm like so happy that I can sit here and say that I'm successfully self-employed. I post sort of tennis career, that was always my dream. My dream was always to be self-employed because I wanted to manage my own time and be my own boss and very much handpick the work I do based on what brings me joy and that I'm passionate about. And I'm actually there. So for me, like my goal is to continue that, but obviously I want to increase my income because Chris and I, as I mentioned, we love to travel, we love to go to nice places. So for me, it's to continue on that self-employed journey, but increase my income so we can continue to do nice things. And that is literally all I kind of want out of my professional life. And I just want to be happy and healthy and be with my husband and my dog and those who I love. And I know it sounds like a cliche, but for so many years being on the tour, like I felt like I missed out on so much, with those people because you're just away all the time. And my goal is just to make sure I always have time for that. And by being self-employed, I can prioritize the right things. And that is what truly makes me happy.
Well, Louise, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast. I've loved hearing all about your journey, and congratulations on what has been a phenomenal career, and and congrats on all the things you've been doing post-retirement as well. I think you've been doing some amazing things with the commentary, being a competition director and things like that, and look forward to sort of following your journey and seeing what you go on to do in the future. Like I say, thank you once again, and look forward to hopefully catching up with you again one day.
Thank you for having me.
No worries. Thanks, Louise.
We did it.